A cry for justice? Returning to my body? Yeah, we're continuing our journey on visions of glory in today's video. Hello Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa, which is over there. The bookcase is behind me, because this is going to be for our book club, I guess you could call it, or the podcast version of the Sofa Squad, where we review books and things like that, and films. And today we're going to continue on with Visions of Glory. Now, we're still in the very beginning of the book or whatever, for the most part, like page 35. And so far what we've been doing is listening to this gentleman recalling his near-death experience, what he learned, this type thing. So we're just continuing on with that. He's going to be talking about like how he can, get the history of objects and people and things of that nature in this state. If you haven't listened to part 1 and 2, go back and listen to part 1 and 2, because this will make more sense. Now, what will happen is at the very end of this, so these are being put out on like the regular channel or whatever, but at the very end of this, I'll have them all combined into one massive reading, but I get to these as I can, so it's not like I'm putting them out on a semi-regular basis. I'll get back to it now that some things have wound down and whatnot, but just so you know, I haven't forgotten about it. Here we are, and we'll keep going with it. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, so like I said, the next little section is called A Cry for Justice. I found a few items in the hospital that were saddened by how they had been used by their owners. A few things had been used on crimes or for violent or immoral purposes, and their voices included a cry for redemption and justice. It was not a shrill or piercing or unpleasant sound, but it was unending and carried the vivid details of the injustice. I knew that the object itself was not diminished or condemned, but it waited with patient expectation for the day of redemption. I walked through a wall into a nice office. It was more nicely furnished than the others, with beautiful pictures in the walls and ornate wooden furniture. I considered going out the door to see whose office this was, but as I walked through a desk, I was stunned by what I felt. It was a longing for redemption. I realized that recently a series of love letters had been written at this desk, promoting an affair that ultimately would injure many people. I knew the content of every letter and the true emotion and manipulation of the writer, as well as the reaction of the reader. I moved away, not wanting to remain in that stream of torrid details. I went through the couch, and it likewise testified of the same affair and unrighteous events that had occurred here some recently. My word! I mean, when you say the walls could talk, Lord, well, this office had a lot to say. I could not find any place in that beautiful office that was not saddened or offended or crying for redemption. Very interesting, right? Now, this is one thing, I mean, you kind of always sit here and think about it. I'm just going to pause for a second. Like, when you think about objects, especially with the cases that we follow and whatnot, like where I say, if the walls could talk, or what's the vibe left after some tragic event like this happens. So it's interesting to hear him talking about this. But again, this is on the basis of this is true and whatnot, if you believe this. Overall, I'm just going to say this right here, because reading this and this notion of this and like, sensing a story and, the vibe, the redemption and what happened and all this, there's almost like a romanticized thing about this. Like, it's very thought-provoking and intriguing, if this is really such a thing to be able to experience and know all at one time like that, and the history of everything and the narrative and whatnot. But again, I'm looking at this through the lens of why does this have Lori and Chad and Jody and these people in a chokehold? I'm still waiting for it to get completely turned up. We haven't gotten there yet. So let's go to the next section. Okay, sorry about that. I had to go get my glasses real quick. So let's keep going. The next section is called Returning to My Body. I was about to leave when I again felt the call of my body. Instantly, I found myself back in the procedure room, looking at my body. And all of my latter experiences of leaving my body, I rose up out of it. But for reasons I still don't understand, I left and re-entered my body from beneath during this experience. I suddenly found myself under the table, moving rapidly up through it and into my body from beneath. This time it was more painful than any of the other times. The pain was being experienced by my body, but as I connected with it, I felt it all. I was still aware in my spirit self, which, as I described, has enhanced sensibilities. For a moment I could feel both my spirit as it was rocked and pounded by my body's pain, and the pain of my body. The shock of the pain from both sources was overwhelming. Then, an instant later, I was only aware of my body. I was back inside. I was not just waking up as if from anesthesia, but was fully conscious and aware of everything. I was sick, almost as sick as a mortal can be and still be alive. I had no strength to even blink my eyes. I was overwhelmingly nauseated but too weak to vomit. My heartbeat was irregular and I could feel sickness from all of the medications they had injected into me. I couldn't believe this was actually my body. It felt sicker than I had ever felt it. I felt body burdened, as if my spirit wanted to fly out of it again, but my body was holding it down with a tremendous weight. I struggled to breathe. I could hear the nurses and doctors talking anxiously among themselves, and then to me. I opened my eyes. My perception of the passage of time was that I had been out of my body for 5 or 6 hours. I had seen and experienced so much and had wandered the halls of the hospital with no sense of needing to hurry, poking my head through closed doors and walking through every wall I could find. Yet when my eyes finally focused upon the clock on the wall of the procedure room, only 20 minutes had expired. It made no sense to me. I felt confused. They got me up and fed me some orange juice. I felt ill, so they told me to lie back down, and rest. A doctor came and told me what had happened. He spoke of it all casually, like this happens all the time. He wanted me to come to his office for a while and rest to make sure I was going to be okay. I felt too weak. They enlisted my wife, Lynn, to encourage me. She rolled me in a wheelchair to his office. She did not realize what had just happened. I recognized his office as the ornate office where the love affair had been enacted. But the office furnishings were silent, no longer speaking to my spirit, which was now apparently firmly back in my body. I told the nurse who stayed with us I'd been dead. She shook her head and replied, "No, you have just had a hard time with the contrast, but now you are fine." She was reassuring, but she did not understand what I was trying to say. Everyone who spoke to us tried to minimize what had just happened. They didn't want to hear anything I had to say. In about half an hour, they told us I was fine and sent me home. Again, I just paused for a second there. So imagine, like, again, if this is true, all that type of stuff. Imagine doing all that, and then they're talking about, okay, we can go home. You'd be like, what? Hold on now. I got something to say. Now, the next section is called Many Different Death Experiences. A major part of this experience was that I began to understand agency and that people are having different experiences after death. This is something I had certainly never supposed. Some people would not even admit they were dead. Other people, like myself, were just waiting for their bodies to be restored so they could re-enter them. These people were having experiences of many different types. Some were given the choice to return to mortality. I didn't seem to have a choice, as I was just called back. Some of the dead were met by angels of light who accompanied them away from the hospital in a column of light. At the time, especially after I tried several times to re-enter my body, I considered them to be the more blessed ones. This out-of-body experience alone has given me decades of information to process and try to understand. Narrating this book is actually the first time in my life that I have tried to put all of these experiences into words. I have wondered, pondered, and prayed about them for most of my life, but this is the first time I have tried to describe them aloud. It is interesting to me to see how difficult it is, how few words there are to describe the true meaning of life and what really happens when one dies. So there you go. I mean, this is like the premise of we're now getting into it, right? So page 37, which really is not that much in the scheme of things, but we're like, okay, here it is. The experiences happened, or one of them. Here we go, right? So here we go. The next thing is called Back at Home. A few days after we arrived home, I began to feel improved. I told Lynn about my out-of-body experience and about my visiting her in the waiting room. I told her that I had actually died. She was skeptical, though she found it inexplicable that I knew what magazine article she had been reading, and that I could remember it up to the point that she had stopped reading when the speakers blared, "Code Blue, Code Blue." I told her everything, how she had looked up and then stood up, how she was dangling the magazine from one hand, all of it. She confirmed to me that everything I said was actually true, though she could not bring herself to believe I had actually been dead for 20 minutes. She asked for an appointment with my doctor, and we both went. She demanded to know the truth of what happened that day. The doctor would not admit that I had died. The only thing the doctor would say was that there were some scary moments when your heart stopped. You were not breathing, but we revived you. He completely minimized the experience and told us not to worry about it further. I think what he was really saying was, please don't sue us. I mean, amen to that, right? Y'all, we have chapter 2. 3 videos in, chapter 2. That's my fault. It's all I can do to read the book. So, chapter 2, Paradise Lost is the name of it, and the first section is Rearranging My Life. I thought about these experiences every day thereafter, pondering them and what they meant. There were so many things that were contrary to my long-held beliefs, especially about my biological father and my birth. I carefully recorded these experiences in my journal. I pondered daily how to change my life to conform to what God had just shown me. Before this, my life goal was to advance my career, to become a tenured professor, and to retire by the time I was 50. My goal was to become rich, to become well-known, to write books, and to become famous. I wanted to work in the church, serving in any capacity, working my way up to the priesthood, as I thought of it at that time, proving myself faithful and of service to the Latter-day Church. Following this experience beyond the veil, I spent the next 10 years rearranging my life from egocentric to Christ-centric. It was not an easy transition. I came to realize that almost all of my goals were misaligned with God's plan for me. I had been taught all my life to make money, raise a family, get known by the world, and then the Lord will use you in whatever way, because you will be skilled, rich, and available. I'm not sure if previous to this experience I had subscribed completely to this goal in life, yet it is what I have been taught all my life by leaders, even by both of my mission presidents. It had never completely rung true to me, and now I knew why. Before this time, I had been of the mindset that I needed to get to a place in my life where God could know me, see my good works and my determination, and then He would know what I could do. After that experience, I knew that God already knew me in great detail and better than I knew myself. What He was teaching me in this experience was, Spencer, you have it wrong. You need to learn to see yourself as I see you and know yourself as I know you, not the other way around. I already know all about you. Being out of my body and knowing without a doubt with total surety that there is a grand spiritual work and spiritual world that we can't see took me out of a circle that circumscribed only Spencer and expanded that circle of my understanding to include these unseen world of heavenly things, including family members, angels, and Jesus Christ Himself. It changed me forever. As I mentioned before, it seemed to me as if the angels had left the door open into heaven. I continued to see people differently than before. I could see them to some extent through God's eyes. I could love them more. And the Lord sometimes sent me to help them in ways that would have been impossible otherwise, miraculous ways, it might seem, if one did not realize that God's hand is always working in our life. Again, I want to pause there for 1 second, because again, reading this, it's like, oh, what a beautiful notion, right? But then also look at it through the lens of people like Lori and Jody and these people who literally think that they're God and try and play that role. And this whole thing of, I continue to see people differently than before. I could see them to some extent through God's eyes. I could love them more, and the Lord sometimes sent me to help them in ways that would have been impossible otherwise, miraculous ways, it might seem, if one did not realize that God's hand is always working in our lives. So it's almost like you can see where these nuances start to come into play for an unbalanced, unwell person, like, you know, these cases that we follow and whatnot, to where, yeah, if this is their ride or die book right here, so to speak, and like we're getting into this type of stuff, who wouldn't? Well, I shouldn't even say that, because a lot of people, including myself, I'm like, I wouldn't. The notion of like, oh my gosh, there's more out there. This is like a human, just a thing that we're all consumed with, whether subconsciously, unconsciously, whatever. What happens when we die? Where do we go? Is this it? These big, huge life questions that we have, right? And so it's very comforting to think that, oh gosh, there's more. But then these people, and again, I'm talking the Jodys, the Chads, the Lori's, people like this, they take it this next level of not only is there more, but I've gone and gotten that and can teach you about it and, you know, change your life. Listen to me. I know. I've experienced. I've gone down the portal. After this life-altering experience, I began getting information from God to give to my clients. Okay, this is what I'm talking about right here. I would upon occasion have to wait for them to stop talking so that I could tell them what I had just learned. Over time, as I became more sensitive to spiritual things and more obedient in my response to them, my discernment improved. My insights into their lives improved. I sometimes saw and visioned the things that had happened to these clients, and my compassion and understanding was great for them. I couldn't help but be sympathetic. We are never alone is the next section. Another significant thing I learned was that we are never alone. Angels are always present, both good and evil. I also realized that by my behavior, mood, or thoughts, I was in control of who was in the room with me. I used to feel negative feelings or emotions and feel overpowered by them. I was starting to realize that I was dealing with dark spirits who overwhelmed me when I gave them permission by my emotions. I realized I was in control, and I worked hard to remain positive and loving, to invite divine beings into my life who uplifted me and those around me. It is a tenet of my faith now that for good or evil, we are never alone. I also realize that our agency is always honored, so much so that even though there are good angels around us, we still have to invite their intervention. We invite them to assist us by prayer, by having hope, by feeling faith and belief. Even the words we may think quietly or speak to ourselves, even these matter. Please show me, please help me, please God help me find my keys, please God save my children. All of these things trigger powerful things from the other side of the veil. They become even more when we have learned to respond to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, because we can be given the answers to these urgent prayers more quickly and profoundly. Every time God becomes involved in our lives, He is teaching and bringing to pass our eternal life. When Father answers our prayers, He does so through angels, because the angels grow also. They learn what it is like to be like God, to serve and to relay God's answers to His children's prayers. This process is extremely orderly and divinely orchestrated. There is no happenstance or coincidence in their work. The good angels are subject to His command and limited or empowered by our faith. There are no oops moments when dealing with God or His messengers. Prayers are never not answered correctly due to an error on the other side. Everything happens as God directs. Now, the next thing is called redirecting my life. So now, all of those worldly pursuits that I thought should define my life were taken away. I was shown that much of what I was trying to do was totally wrong for me. I was shown that it was the wrong pursuit. Stop it. I attempted to obey. I did complete my education and established my career because I had seen that it was part of the right path for me. In my work, I often call upon Heavenly Father to let the angels that surround me and my client intervene. I do so with complete assurance that God hears me and the angels respond. Perhaps I have greater faith in the principle than most mortals because I have seen the angels. Before this time, I had worked in a large hospital with children suffering from cancer. There were times when I would see with spiritual eyes an angelic intervention to lengthen the child's life and knew it would happen. These times resulted in cures that could only be miracles of God. Upon occasion, I also realized that a child's life was at an end, and they had completed their mortal work. The child would pass away shortly thereafter. I would then have a great peace knowing their lives were short but complete, which comfort I could pass on to their parents and family. At this time, I was teaching a single sister with 3 children. This sister had brain cancer, and I wanted to cure her. I wanted to call upon the priesthood to heal her. She asked me to give her a blessing, but when I put my hands on her head, I was shown in vision that she would not live out the year. I didn't want to say so I gave her a blessing of comfort, but it was not the blessing I wanted to give her, nor was it the blessing Father had shown me He had in store for her. She turned to me after the blessing with tears running down her face and asked, "Why didn't you tell me what you saw? Why didn't you give me the blessing you saw?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "I saw the same vision that you saw. I'm not going to live much longer than a year." I told her I was afraid to say it, afraid that it would discourage you or frighten your children. She replied, "Since it's God's will, it will help me to accept it. It is what I needed to see. Even though you didn't say it out loud, I saw it with you, and I know it is true. Thank you for this blessing." She lived out about 11 more months and then succumbed, leaving her 3 young children in the hands of family members. It was just one of the many powerful experiences where my spiritual sensibilities and spiritual feelings were greatly enhanced. Unfortunately, I wasn't strong enough to speak the words properly, so Father showed this young mother the same vision I saw in her behalf. I learned much about my responsibility to do His work. Even though fear tries to stop me from saying what has to be said, it is always the right thing to do. I tried from then on not to fear the emotions and concerns of men more than the will of God. Again, like reading this and listening to it, I just go back to how dramatic Chad and Lori were on that phone call with Alex Cox, talking about that blessing and all this type of stuff. I mean, they so bad want to be this. They so bad want to be God, like, we've come from the other side of the veil. It was a long, long war-torn journey, but we're here. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so desperately wanted to play God. I mean, just the level of ego. And then that phone call where they're weeping and like, and crying and like Chad just whimpering. Oh my, it turns my damn stomach. Okay, let's keep going. After this out-of-body experience, my life went through a long and difficult evolution, especially when you consider that such decisions were not entirely mine, because these were my wife's and family's dreams as well. I had instilled my dreams into them for years, and now I was faced with trying to teach them why I had changed my life and my goals. These changes were not accomplished without resistance. Besides my family, almost all of my colleagues, fellow professors, and peers at the universities, even those who had mentioned and advanced me at their universities, all resisted the changes I was making. Some of them viewed me as a self-destructive. Others viewed me as just stupid. There were even a few who told me that I had suffered a mental or emotional breakdown. I listened to all of these people, but decided to move forward with determination to do what I had been shown I must do. I left several of my hospital tenures, retired from several university appointments, and focused on my private practice. During this time of change, my health continued to degrade slowly. My immune system was compromised by surgery and many health problems. I had surgeries on my gallbladder, a burst appendix, and sinus surgery because I had continual sinus infections. I have had rheumatic fever twice, a heart murmur, and every cold and flu that came to town. It is my present realization that I set myself up for these illnesses by continuing the unhealthy emotional state which I acquired from childhood. I had not yet learned to not let those losses manifest themselves as physical illness. Also, I worked long and hard and didn't eat well. I didn't sleep enough. When I exercised, I worked out too hard or ignored exercise for long periods of time. The last and greatest reason for all of these health problems was that I was blessed to have health crisis in order to experience physical death multiple times and thus to see these visions. I know now that before I was born, I chose this course for myself. I was glad to be able to choose this path for my life, and although it has been hard and painful and always terrifying, I still feel as if my life has been tremendously blessed because of this process in my life. I wouldn't go back and choose a different path even if I could. By this time, Lynn and I had 5 children. My wife and children were doing well during these times, though we had the normal challenges of young families. Okay, so the next section here is called Tahiti. After all of these medical challenges, career alterations, and family growth, my sweetheart and I decided to take a much-needed break from life and go on vacation to Tahiti in March of 1995. We planned to go with Lynn's parents and her siblings. We all left our children home and were excited to get away. Lynn and I hoped to brighten our relationship, our dreams, and my health by total relaxation and rest in a tropical island, or paradise. We took a long flight to Los Angeles and then to Honolulu. From there, we flew to Tahiti. One of the curses that I have struggled with all my life is that I cannot fall asleep on an airplane. I arrived in Tahiti sleep deprived after the 24-hour journey. We arrived on the island of Papit, where the LDS temple is located. It was warm and beautiful on the island. A gentle tropical breeze was blowing. We boarded a boat and traveled to the nearby island of Moray to the small resort there. We arrived to find that the hotel was a series of charming huts, each consisting of one large room under a palm-thatched roof. The walls were open with insect nets for walls. There was a single bathroom toward the back of the bungalow. The rooms were decorated with island art and paintings. It was completely charming. Now, here's me over here. Literally, when I started reading that, I was like, please tell me what do they do about AC? I was like, please, there's no way. It sounds very charming, and at one point in life, I could have dealt with it. But literally, at this stage of life, I would have been like, absolutely not. We can go visit that part, but where is the AC? Okay, we need that. We are already having a hot flash at the thought of it. Okay, let's keep going. It was wintertime back at home, so we went from snowdrifts to an island paradise. I remember commenting that this was what Bali High and the musical South Pacific must have been like. There were towering purple volcanic mountains in the center of the island that sloped downward through lush vegetation to a beautiful park, which ended in perfectly white sand and intense crystal clear blue-green ocean. A coral reef protected the island from waves from large fish and sharks. My wife and I arrived tired from the long trip. There were about 22 of us. Each couple had their own cute bungalow on the beach. We agreed to shower and freshen up after the long journey and then meet at the restaurant that was connected to the resort. Now, also interesting here is the fact of like, so, you know, you look back to Lori and Chad's, you know, honeymoon pictures and whatnot, and this fascination with, you know, going to Hawaii and all these places, whatever. So it's interesting. You know what I mean? Like, just like reading through this or whatever, hearing this whole thing. So I'm just curious to see where this goes, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Let's keep going. I realized I was too fatigued to go to dinner, and I asked my wife to bring me something back from the restaurant. She was concerned for me, but assuming it was just fatigue, she agreed and left. I turned on the shower, and the water came out of the shower the color of mud. I was disgusted and let it run until it became clear. While I showered, my heart was racing. I suspected it was just a lack of sleep. I dressed, lay down on the bed, and started sweating profusely. I knew something was wrong now, but there was no phone in the bungalow. I felt a crushing pain in my chest, which just kept getting worse. I was having difficulty breathing. It did not have the ability to call for help. Okay, so pause real quick. So you already know where this is going, right? Okay, so here's my thing. Have you ever noticed, like, so I'm kind of like thinking forward in this book. I'm like, okay, so his whole like little gimmick for this, and I'm just using the word gimmick. I'm not saying that's what it is, but you know, his whole shtick, his gimmick, whatever you want to call it, is going to be like, he constantly like dies and has these experiences and brings back knowledge or whatever. Okay, so, and my first thought is, I'm like, oh, well, of course this would happen to somebody like multiple times, but you know, other people never, right? Not that you're wanting to constantly die and have these situations or whatever, but also like if you look at Chad, it was like, well, me too, but also like the same thing of like, if you look at like, now we're going off on the left-hand field here, but if you ever like listen to stories, like YouTube stories, whatever, on people who talk about like alien abduction and things like that, where I'm always like this, I'm like, why does this happen to like one person like all the time? But like, I can't even see anything unique or fascinating up in the sky. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on now, let me have at least one abduction, please. Let's keep going, but actually I'm not serious. I don't want to be abducted by aliens. That's not something that I really long for. Although I do want to know, like if you really do, like when you like pass away, if you get answers and stuff, I want to know if there is other life out there. That is one of the big things. Jean-Benet Ramsey, and are there aliens? Okay, call me simple, but these are the two things at the forefront of my mind. Let's keep going. The next thing I recall was that I rose up out of my body into the ceiling. It felt the same as when I had died 12 years earlier while getting the x-ray contrast, except that this time I rose upward out of my body instead of departing down through the bed. My first thought was, I'm dying in a foreign land. I worried about how my wife was going to make the arrangements to transport my body back to America and how the children would be devastated. I also felt like I wanted to leave the hut and explore around the island, but I had a strong sense that I needed to stay with my body. Right at this moment, my wife returned to the room. I willed myself to re-enter my body, and I whooshed from the ceiling back into my body. I was able to tell her I was very sick. She sat on the edge of the bed and talked to me for a while. I told her that I suspected I was dying because I was once again having out-of-body experiences. She was really concerned and took my pulse, which was racing. She went back to the restaurant to get her father and my brother-in-law. They gave me a priesthood blessing. Let's just keep going. Nowhere in this have we called 911 or whatever it is down there, right? Okay, that's where I'm at with this. Like, literally my first thought for this was, if this is legit, where are the paramedics? Why? What? We're going to take the time to do the priesthood blessing, but not or even sit there and be like, here, I brought you some chicken nuggets. See if these will help your racing heart, baby. You know what I'm saying? Immediately call 911 or whatever. I don't know what this situation is there. Maybe they don't have 911 there. I don't know. But you know, they have some kind of an emergency service of something, I would think, right? But no, we don't want the chicken nuggets. I'm just literally making the chicken nugget thing up. She didn't say that, but we don't want the blessing. We want the ambulance. We want heart drugs. We want all sorts of things, right? Okay. I tried to stay in my body long enough to receive the blessing, but was having trouble doing so. I kept feeling like I was floating away. The priesthood blessing mentioned that I would recover and that I had further work to do in this life. It also said that if anything needed to be done medically, that I would be blessed to be strong enough to wait until we got back into the United States. Okay. That's it. This is getting turned up. First of all, well, let me keep going. I'm all fired up over this. Okay. Lynn's sister is a registered nurse. Well, there you go. Thank you. Someone has some common sense here. Can we please get her with one of those little listening things on him immediately? She spoke to the hotel about other medical options on the island. There was a small clinic on the other side of the island. The clinic only had a couple of nurses and an occasional doctor. We decided I would be better off taking my chances staying where I was rather than trying to make the journey to the clinic. We're going to talk about that in a second. After the blessing, they gave me some aspirin, and I decided I would just stay in bed and try to recover. I told them I was going to sleep and assured everyone that I would be okay, though I strongly suspected that I was going to leave my body again. They were comforted and returned to the restaurant to finish their dinner. I'm done. We've entered a new realm in this book. Literally need my can't roll my eyes hard enough cup, but I put it away. Y'all, this is the thing. This is how you know that this is not real. Number one, he's setting up the story to go. So we already know what's going to happen, right? Okay, if we don't, we're gonna kind of wager bets here. So he's getting ready to say they went back to the restaurant. And he's going to go into this next major intense near-death experience. Though you would think if he was completely making this up, that it would have been like he wouldn't have done this little side journey of, I came to, she came back, we did this, Because again, this is the kind of thing right here that I'm like, unless you're ready to cross over, unless you're like, I'm good, we might need to be talking about going back to the States. If this is the scenario on the island and you're experiencing this level of like you just left your body, you know you've done this before, right? So you know that this is like a dying thing. No. And at minimum, you don't send them back to the restaurant unless you want to keep writing your story. Okay, here we go. Let's keep going. Now, also, well, I'll say this after we read this, because the first line I already have something to say, but we'll get to it. Okay, sorry. I lay in bed praying, pleading with Father that if he needed me to leave mortality, to please let me wait until I got back into the United States, where I could do this without ruining these people's vacation. I also felt like it would be really unfortunate to pass from this life in a foreign land for some reason. I once again left my body and went to the top of the ceiling. There was a large paddle fan at the ceiling, which was running on its highest level. I found myself above my body and to the side of the fan. This time the major difference was that I was totally alone. There were no other spirits to greet me or watch after me. I waited a long time by the fan as I felt increasingly more abandoned and bereft of support. It was disconcerting to me that in a world I knew was filled with spirit beings, and yet to be by myself. I again pleaded with Father to please send a righteous spirit to be with me, so that I would not be dead, lost, and alone in this foreign land. A voice came into my spirit as if it entered into my bosom, saying that I needed to go through this darkness to understand that which would be forthcoming in my life. I did not understand what it meant at the time, but have since been able to understand. It meant that I needed to understand suffering by viewing evil at its darkest. I was naive at this time in my life. I wanted to believe in the inherent goodness of people. I was shortly going to see in vision a people whose only purpose in living was to do evil. Well, this must be getting ready to be where the day bills come in. I mean, my God. Okay, let's get into it. So it keeps going. They preferred evil and debauchery over everything else. They delighted in other people's suffering and were bored and depressed when they were not hurting someone. I did not even know such people existed, let alone constituting a whole society. I had been shown great light, visions of God and angels, and in order to comprehend greater truth and greater light, now I had to understand its opposite, the pure evil side of the equation. All things in mortality and eternity exist in opposites. To comprehend greater and greater light, I had to also comprehend greater darkness. Even Jesus Christ had to descend below all things before he could rise above all things. The same seemed to be true for me, though in a far lesser degree than our Savior, of course. Still, the divine laws that govern these blessings demand the juxtaposition of good and evil. I had to understand by personal experience. Therefore, I had to experience feeling this frightening aloneness, this separation from God. I had never experienced this previously. I apparently also needed to know what it was like to feel completely devoid of the Holy Spirit in order to appreciate and understand the greater blessings I had been shown could be mine. It was as if God was saying, this is the time appointed for you, Spencer, to experience these dark things. So I found myself struggling with viewing things I had never ever imagined could be true. Being on vacation in this faraway place, a place with a dark history where my work and my children, family and wife were distracted by other things, became the perfect setting for this dark chapter of my education and heavenly things. While I was floating near the ceiling, my wife and one of her sisters came into the room. They thought I was sleeping, so they checked on me, touching my shoulder, and then they quietly left the room. They looked at one another and agreed that I was sleeping. They left me and sat on my front porch of our bungalow. I was not sleeping, but was out of my body, watching this happen from the viewpoint of the ceiling. I did not know if I was dead or alive, because this felt much different than my experience 12 years ago. At this point, I still did not have the ability to leave the bungalow. I mean, one thing that I would be wondering if I was him is I'd be like, well, why aren't they sticking a mirror under my nose? Why aren't they touching my pulse? Can we get a little bit more, can we do a little more vital checking here? You know what I'm saying? I guess the nonchalance of oh, okay, well, he's sleeping. I mean, we just kind of had a he's almost dead episode, right? And again, I'm kind of tearing this apart in just the context of if this is being presented as true story. You know what I'm saying? So this is where I'm kind of like, some of this, the math ain't mathing for me, but again, to each their own. It's not, it's not me, it's not my family, it's not how I live, you know what I'm saying? So maybe it's different, but I would have a different expectation. And I can understand not wanting to mess somebody's vacation up 100%. But again, it's like you've already lived through this, so why risk it unless you're ready to go? And he is saying, if it's my time, if I'm meant to leave, just wait till I get back to the States, please. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next thing in here is called the Diorama of Hell. It's one of the wedding pictures of Lori and Chad. Just a joke. There's no pictures there. Can you imagine if he predicted it with his book? Okay, the rest of what I'm going to relate, I still don't completely understand. It was shown to me as if it were a diorama passing in front of my spiritual body. It was three-dimensional, but I was not in the scene. I was looking at it as a spectator. What I was shown was the history of the spiritual and non-spiritual practices of the ancient Tahitians. I was shown that initially they were an enlightened and spirit-filled people, even innocent and undefiled. They knew about Jesus Christ, his role, and his mission, which had come to them from holy men and women who had established their cultural heritage. I saw that their understanding deteriorated over the years as their founders died, and those who believed became fewer in number. They sank to the most gross and graphic form of human torture, debauchery, sexual perversions, and spiritual darkness imaginable. Actually, none of it was imaginable to me. I just saw it and was sickened. In truth, I'm still haunted by the memory of it. Among many other heinous things, they were sacrificing young virgins and killing infants and children in the most awful manner they could devise. It was horrifying to me then, and horrifying to me now, because I saw it as it had happened in great detail. They were doing this in part because of false religion, and in part to avenge themselves of similar atrocities of their enemies, their minds and hearts, and everything they did were saturated by war, revenge, and a lust for everything evil. I could see and feel each person involved in these atrocities. I could feel the hatred, rage, and resentment of those who were doing these horrifying acts, as well as the fear and anguish of their victims. I was spared, actually, feeling their pains, but I experienced them on a spiritual level that was not actually pain, but an understanding of how horrible it had been for them. I could also hear the prayers of the few people among them who were still followers of Christ, who had the Holy Spirit, who were still hanging on to the truth. These faithful few were like scattered little fires of truth all over the island. They hated what was happening to their people and mourned their generations that were lost. They were also compelled to deep secrecy of their beliefs, for believers were prized as victims. Not only was I seeing the suffering and horrifying pains of those who were being tortured, but I was seeing evil spirits who were reveling in their pain. These evil spirits were glorifying in it and urging the mortals to do worse and worse things, giving them inspiration on how to prolong the suffering of their victims. I don't believe mortals could even think of such evil acts, and then forge a society and tradition of debauchery without the evil spirits urging them and instructing them, and not just performing these acts, but in how to also religionize it over many years to make it become traditional and acceptable to the entire society. I mean, that's a very interesting concept if you spread it over various things, right? The whole scene reached such an insane hyperfrenzy of evil that it was frightening to me beyond anything I've ever experienced before or since. I tried to turn away, but the vision would not leave my eyes. I personally felt like I was being exposed to the depths of hell. I was completely repulsed by this vision, although I knew that I was not being punished in any way, but it persisted for some time until I was sick in my soul and begged most earnestly to have it end. In my first experience in 1983, I experienced nothing like this. There was no dark or horrifying side to that experience. Now, all of this was poured out upon me in all of its hellish hue. All this time I was pleading for God to close up this vision and asking him, why must I see this? What does it have to do with me? I cried out to see no more of this horror, and with all the power of my being, I was finally released from the dark vision in front of me. The next section is called the Intercessory Prayer. I next found myself transported to the outside of the Beehive House in the Salt Lake City. This struck me as quite odd to go from viewing the dark history of Tahiti from a distance to actually being there in Salt Lake City. I was no longer looking at a vision, but found myself participating in what was happening, actually experiencing it with all of my senses, not just seeing it. The first thing I saw was television cameras and other media people surrounding the Beehive House. They seemed to be from all around the world. There were news people speaking Japanese, Chinese, French, and many other languages, including English. I recognized local TV stations and crews. These journalists were standing on the west side of the building, mostly, and in the corridor between the church office building and the Lion House. They were surrounding the whole group of buildings. Finding myself delivered from that horrible vision in Tahiti and now standing in and among news crews in Salt Lake City, I thought, what am I doing here? What are all these people doing here? I was asking this question of God. At this point, I remember beginning to accept that I was dead and that my body was still in Tahiti. I felt sorry for Lynn because she was going to find me dead soon. I knew she loved me and that it was going to be a terrible shock to her. I began to feel the spiritual powers I had felt before, to go where I desired and to read people's minds and hearts. I no longer felt lost in the circumstances around me. So I asked, why am I here? There were no other spirits there that I could see. I could only see the mortals around me. I again asked God, what is going on? He replied, you're not going to die in Tahiti. However, I will show you that which will surely come to pass. I was told that this vision was a metaphor, a type of things that would shortly happen, not an actual occurrence that I was viewing, or even that it would happen just this way. At that moment, I could feel the thoughts and the emotion of all these individuals waiting around the buildings. They were excited, in great anticipation of some important event. Among some of them, especially the local news crews, there was fear and sadness. They had long poles with those fuzzy microphones on the end, as if they were expecting an announcement of some type. I discerned that they were waiting for the announcement and that the current prophet of the church had passed away. This caused me to sorrow because the current prophet was my friend. In the course of my service, I had been in meetings with him many times, and I loved him. I found myself at the back of the Beehive House. I had never been there before. There were metal stairs going one flight up the back with a green door at the top. The stairs looked like an emergency exit rather than a part of the original plan of the building. I climbed the stairs like a normal person, step by step. I could feel and hear my footsteps, and I could feel the handrail with my left hand. It was perfectly vivid and real to me. I arrived at the top and opened the door, which felt hard and cool to the touch. There was a security guard sitting at a raised desk with a video monitor right inside the door. He was watching the screen intently. He did not see me or acknowledge me. I again asked, what am I doing here? The voice I had heard earlier replied, you have much to learn. Go down the hall. So I walked down a long hall. At the other end of the hall, there was another security guard facing me. He was sitting outside of a door to my left in a folding chair. He was reading a set of scriptures. It was a triple combination with a name embossed on the cover. I didn't attempt to read the name. I just assumed they were the guard's scriptures. I moved past him and through the door without opening it. I did this because I knew I was in spirit form and did not need to open the door. I found myself in a square bedroom about 12 by 12 feet feet with a tall pitched ceiling. There was a large bed to my left with a patchwork quilt that was ornate and beautiful. It looked to be an antique. The furniture was old and beautifully crafted. The room appeared to be a set like in a museum. There was an antique washing stand with a porcelain pitcher and basin. After I had taken this all in, I was suddenly aware of an elderly man kneeling on an antique oval rag beside the rug. I realized at once that it was my apostolic friend of many years. Initially, I could not hear what he was saying, and even so, I felt like I was intruding. I discerned that he could not see or hear me. As I mentioned, this was a vision to teach me, not an actual happening. I again asked, "What am I doing here?" because I felt like I had no right to be there. I turned to leave the room, and then I started hearing him speak. The voice of the Spirit said to me, "Listen well, Luke." He didn't say Luke. Because he and I had worked together on several church projects, we had become personal friends. I turned back to face him, still feeling that I was intruding upon sacred events I should not be seeing or hearing. I was shown this great friend and servant of God in an intercessory prayer with Father regarding himself and what he would experience in the future. He was pleading for the will of the Father to take place in his behalf and his family, and that he would be able to endure it well and be empowered to drink of the bitter cup without becoming bitter myself. These are words I heard him speak as he poured out his heart in prayer. It was confusing to go from seeing the debauchery of Tahiti's past to the sacred scene of suffering and righteous acceptance of the Lord's will. I now believe the stark contrast was to teach me how suffering could actually sanctify and bring about exaltation when the sufferer submits to Christ and lets the suffering purify and complete their mortal experience. I was watching my friend begin his journey into the suffering. He was not praying for escape, but for strength to endure it well. Now that little paragraph right there, just apply that to the thinking of somebody like Jody Hildebrand. That right there, the suffering, it basically builds character, this kind of thing. Very interesting. I learned by all this that it is through suffering that mortals learn compassion and endurance and faithfulness, but that there has to also be a great willingness to be purified and uplifted in this way. I was seeing my own future in a way too. I understood that I would also be called to suffer, so that I too could be purified, completed, and Christ-like when I left mortality, and I had to submit to this process willingly. This is what the angel meant when he told me, "I will show you that which will surely come to pass." He was saying, you will suffer and you will successfully submit and thereby be purified. It has taken me many years to arrive at this understanding. I don't believe I was prepared to submit to any more suffering than I was then experiencing at that time, being dead in Tahiti and all that implied. The Lord had been merciful in allowing me to learn in that moment, and then I could more fully embrace when I was prepared many years later. My vision changed. I saw that my friend was in the same position, beside the same bed. The only thing that had changed was that the rug under his knees appeared to be a sheepskin rug. This time I was astonished to realize that he was pleading for me in my behalf and for what I was going to be going through. He was speaking in the same fashion as before, but pleading this time for me. He was weeping. Both of these prayers were long, protracted, and beautiful pleadings with Father. His words overwhelmed me. I felt deep concern that I was somehow creating this pain and struggle in my friend. It also confused and troubled me that he had seen something of my future struggles, which obviously worried him in my behalf. I had no idea what future struggles he knew awaited me. I asked Father in my mighty prayer, "Please bless this man, that if it be possible, he might not have to endure these things on my account." And I pled to know, what have I done? What has happened to me to cause my friend this struggle in my behalf? Why am I seeing this? Please help me to learn what I must learn from this. I was frightened that he must have seen in my future that I was going to make some great mistake or walk away from my ordained path, which is something I never hoped to do. It frightened me to ponder these possibilities. Okay, please hold there. Now again, a theme that we're seeing here that I'm picking up here is, and again, this is through the filter of people like, Chad and Lori and Jody and these like God complex people, is this whole fascination. I'm especially thinking of Chad right now, of, they've got these answers. They've seen all this stuff. They've gone beyond the veil. They're being shown these things. Number one, how special does that make you? You have this privileged information. You have this and that. Of course, that would be intoxicating. So someone like Chad who rips everybody off when he sees something that is of interest to him, something like this right here, oh please, right? Like he's seeing all these visions and stuff. And like this whole thing about this and I don't even know how to describe it, but like, I'm thinking back again to the blessing with Alex, Chad talking about my near-death experiences and, all afterlife, whatever. This obsession with being more important than you really are. I understand that, like, the human condition that we are here living through and figuring out, there's an unknownness to it that's scary. What happens to us when we die? Is this it? Do I leave meaning? Does this mean anything? What am I doing this for? Like, some of these really deep questions, right? But again, it just seems like low-hanging fruit to be like, well, I know what I'll do. I'll just say that I died, got some answers, and, that's kind of it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh, well, I know you mortals don't recognize that I'm God, but I died, and he told me that I was. Okay. So, and if you question that, well, then that's on you. You know what I mean? Like, it just, it just seems so obvious to me. So, anyways, let's keep going. Now, the next section is called Beloved Prophet. At that exact moment, I turned and looked to the right side of the bed, and I saw the current prophet of the church. You will recall that I knew this noble servant of God well from my service with him and others of the 12. I also remembered the reporters outside the building waiting for the announcement of his death. He was smiling at me. He said to me without moving his mouth, "Spencer, it'll be all right." My apostle friend was still kneeling there, and I still felt like I was intruding in his prayers and supplications. I was confused by seeing the prophet in this visionary metaphor, because this was not an actual event. I understood that my friend could not hear or see either myself or the prophet. The prophet then started walking toward me. To my knowledge, the prophet was still alive, yet here I was seeing him as a spirit. I also wondered why I, who was not going to die in Tahiti, according to what I had just been told, was here in this room witnessing all of this. The last time I'd seen the prophet was at the dedication of a temple 2 months earlier. He was in a wheelchair and frail and appeared to not have much time left on earth. When I saw him in the room, he was spry with a bounce to his step. His voice was strong and clear. He was buoyant in his spirit and smiling from ear to ear as he walked toward me in this vision. He was, as I remembered from long ago, soft as velvet, but a true lion of the Lord. He said to me, "It is time for me to leave." He put his arm through my right arm and escorted me outside of the room. We passed through the door without opening it, yet I could feel his arm on mine as if we were both mortal. He stopped in the hall and told me he was looking forward to once again seeing my grandfather and grandmother with whom he had served when he had been a stake president, and my grandfather was a bishop serving under him. He then let go of my arm and turned to me, looking at me earnestly and again and said, "It'll be all right." I did not know what he meant. My mind was worried about my body in Tahiti and about my apostle friend and about why I was seeing the prophet in this whole vision. I did not reply but was taken it all in with considerable amazement and confusion. The prophet continued walking away from me, down the hall in the direction I had come in. He turned back to me and exclaimed, "Just like my Savior said, it is finished." I knew he was speaking of his own life and rejoicing that it was now over and that he had triumphed. He nodded to the guard and smiled as he addressed him by name. "Ryan." The guard nodded and respectfully replied, "President." The prophet then walked through the closed door by the guard and disappeared from my sight. I was amazed to see the guard acknowledge him because I had personally thought the guard was a mortal who could not see me, but now I realized that he was an angel with a real body. I couldn't tell if he was resurrected or translated, but he was not a spirit. I felt it was time for me to leave also, and I proceeded to follow the prophet to the door. The guard looked at me and called me by name. "Spencer, would you wait a second?" I paused at the door and turned back. The guard closed the scriptures he had been reading, zipped the covered closed, and then handed them to me. I took them and noted that my name was embossed at the bottom of the scriptures. Both the book and the cover were green. I had never before seen the standard works with a green cover. I was pleased to receive them and mystified by the symbolism I sensed but could not understand. Now again, this is another thing that we think about Chad, Lori, especially Chad and Lori. I'm sure Jody, but especially Chad and Lori, with how much they were into like all the stuff of them being the leaders and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like this, you're special. You get this book. You get this information. You've done this and that. It's only in their little world, right? Nobody else would know this. But they clearly drinketh from the cuppeth and really lap this up. And whether they believed it or not, no one will ever really know, right? Okay, let's continue. I thanked him warmly, took the scriptures, and left by walking through the door. I never spoke of this experience to my wife, but the following Christmas she gave me a green copy of the scriptures, embossed exactly as in this vision. I have treasured it all these years. I have since realized that seeing the green scriptures in vision, and then receiving the identical books in the flesh, was a witness that what I had seen in the vision would in time manifest in the flesh. It was not a comforting realization, but I also accepted that the suffering I had seen in the vision of Tahiti and heard in the prayers of the apostle in my behalf were essential to my growth. I also knew it will be all right. My next recollection was re-entering my body in Tahiti. Returning to my body this time was much more painful than in 1983 after the failed medical procedure. After a long while, I felt well enough to sit on the edge of my bed, making sure my spirit was once again firmly inside my body. My body felt heavy, so I just sat there. It was now the middle of the night. My wife was asleep behind me in the bed. I sat there a long time thinking about the vision and what it might mean. There were many things about it that even today are not clear to me. It took about 3 days for my body to regain some strength. I joined my wife and family on vacation, but moved slowly and rested often for the several weeks of our trip until it was time to return home. I shared some of my experiences in the vision with my wife. She believed what I told her and expressed gratitude that I had not died and had stayed with her. She was sweet about it, and I appreciated her willingness to just believe me without possibility of proof. I thought for a second it was going to go, she expressed gratitude for not ruining their vacation. I was like, this is what this says. I'm falling out of the sofa. I'm falling off the sofa. Okay, while we were still in Tahiti, we heard word that the prophet had passed away on the night that I had been out of my body and had seen the vision of him. This caused me to ponder over and over what I had experienced in this vision. If it was really him or just a vision. I rehearsed it again and again in my mind. There was so much of it that I could not understand. First and foremost was why it had happened to me. My mind went back to the horrible scenes of Tahiti's history. It felt like I had been allowed to see what the human condition can deteriorate to when the light of Christ and truth are extinguished. It seemed to me that the Spirit of God had withdrawn from all but a few of those people, and this had left them in the grip of Satan's power. I felt like Satan was still laughing and rejoicing in the condition into which they had devolved. I pondered why I was allowed to interact with a prophet who had just died the same night. He was exuberant to be out of his body. I saw what he had gone through in his life and in his own experience with approaching death, and I had never realized any of it. I didn't even realize the experiences our prophet had endured in his life, which created his velvet and still persona and character that was required to fulfill his earthly mission. I saw how he had been forged in the refiner's fire and how he had endured it well into the end of his life. It occurred to me then that you don't have to be an apostle or prophet for the Lord to search after you and refine you and purify you into your greatest self. I've come to believe that what I was being shown was the extremes of human experience, the dark and the pure. The experience is hard for me to talk about even now. It brings back vivid memories I wish I had never seen, yet cannot seem to forget. The flight back to Utah is difficult for me. When we got home, I went in to see my cardiologist to see what he thought about any experience and the horrible pains I had experienced in my chest. He did an EKG in a treadmill test. They found that I had a valve that wasn't working well. I believe the cause of my second experience with death was this faulty valve. He wanted to insert a pig valve into my heart to replace the faulty one. I declined surgery to replace it because I felt impressed that it wasn't necessary. Since that time, my heart has completely recovered and I have not had a single episode. Now we're going to pause there for this installment because the next is Chapter 3, Vision of the Savior. So we're going to go in fresh, right? That'll be page 57. So again, I can just repeat this part back because we're looking through a certain lens here of, the chokehold and all that kind of stuff. And just like it said in the bottom, like, I realize you don't have to be this person or that person to get this and that. Let me take my glasses off now so that I'm not reading and it doesn't reflect. You don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. You can be this, you can be that. I mean, again, I'm seeing the picture being painted. Now, this is where it's starting to veer off to the left hand for me. Because again, I was chatting with some of you on our little chat thing that we have going. I was like, look, I'm doing another recording of this, another installment. And it's still like, I was like, my body's rejecting the book because it's kind of boring. Like, it's not like this turned up stuff that I'm waiting to get into just hasn't come about. Now, it depends on your level, but I'm talking about, zombie, light and dark, like that kind of Chad and Lori type stuff. We might be getting ready to get into this because now that they're finally talking about like, I went to see these things in Tahiti and, this happened. And then just just the whole story, when things seem a little too perfect, they usually are. So this whole thing about we went on vacation, I basically died again, went away, came back, the vacation was it. You know, see what I'm saying? There's many lenses I'm looking at this through Chad, Lori, Jody, through the way the book is written, through is this true, is it not, it's being presented as this, all these things, right? So when something's being presented as like, hey, here's I'm recounting this thing, but it also seems a little too tidied up with a bow on it. You know, and again, I mean, look at the context of what we're reading here, right? This obsession with visions and, you know, the future and having this, you know, peek behind the veil, you know, and again, seeing how contorted and manipulated that was with people like Chad and Lori, also Jody as well. But, you know, I haven't gone too deep into what Jody's belief systems were as much as I have like Chad and Lori, you know what I mean? And just like even if you just scratch their case, you kind of get into this like, what are they talking about? So I think it's going to get more turned up as we go. Because again, like some of this is just like almost like a pretty little cute story where it's like, oh, he got a vision. Oh, of course. Oh, you know, we've been reassured life will be good. And you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff where I'm like, okay, I mean, depending on what you're into, but it's not like, whoa. But I think we're getting ready to get into the whoa. Okay. So anyways, let me know what you think down in the comment section. If you are still watching, I do appreciate it. And then we'll just pick back up again on the next installment. I basically sit down and read through it as I can get to it and type thing. Again, we'll put it all together at the very end for one big long reading for those who want to just hear the whole thing out. And we'll kind of see what are these visions of glory and why does it have a chokehold on Chad and Lori. So again, if you're still watching, I greatly appreciate it. Drop some little sofas off for me and Roscoe in spirit so we can come down, hang out, talk about this book, cases, films, all the stuff we talk about here at the Sofa Squad, and until we meander our way down there, we'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Roscoe on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.